What if the most powerful crime family in history wasn't the Mafia, the cartel, or the Yakuza, but a bunch of Italian bankers who funded popes, bought kingdoms, and turned murder into high art? They didn't sell drugs. They sold money itself. They didn't whack rivals in back alleys. They poisoned them at banquets, threw them off towers, and called it politics. Their name? The Medici. And their empire was built on debt, death, and the Renaissance itself. In the narrow, shadow-soaked streets of 15th century Florence, power didn't flow from swords or crowns. It flowed from ledgers. And no one wielded a ledger like the Medici. The family began in obscurity. Giovanni di Bicci de' Medici was a wool merchant who understood something his rivals didn't. Money could beget money not just through trade, but through lending. In 1397, he opened a bank in Florence. Within decades, the Medici Bank had branches in Rome, Venice, London, and Bruges. It didn't just store wealth, it manufactured it. The Medici invented techniques that modern finance still uses: holding companies, double-entry bookkeeping, and the strategic use of papal accounts to turn spiritual debt into earthly profit. When the Catholic Church needed to move tithes across Europe, the Medici moved them and took a cut of every soul's tax. But banking alone doesn't make a dynasty. Violence does. Cosimo de' Medici, Giovanni's son, understood this better than anyone. In 1433, a rival faction led by the Albizzi family had him arrested, convicted of treason, and exiled. Cosimo didn't fight in court. He fought in the shadows. Within a year, his network of debtors, spies, and bribed officials engineered a political reversal so complete that the Albizzi were themselves exiled, their property confiscated, their names erased from power. Cosimo returned to Florence not as a banker, but as a king in all but title. He never held official office. He didn't need to. He owned the men who did. The Medici method was elegant. They didn't seize power directly. They bought it. They loaned money to kings, then called in favors. They funded artists, then owned the culture. They married into noble families, then claimed bloodlines they had invented. Cosimo spent his fortune on churches, libraries, and public buildings, not from piety, but from strategy. A grateful population doesn't revolt. A city draped in beauty forgets who paid for the drapes. Then came Lorenzo the Magnificent, and the Medici crime family reached its artistic apex, and it's more nadir. Lorenzo ruled Florence from 1469 to 1492, and under his patronage, the Renaissance exploded. Michelangelo, Botticelli, Leonardo da Vinci, they all ate at his table, slept in his palace, and painted his world into immortality. But Lorenzo's Florence was also a city of daggers. In 1478, the Pazzi family, backed by Pope Sixtus IV, attempted to assassinate Lorenzo and his brother Giuliano during High Mass at Santa Maria del Fiore. Giuliano was stabbed 19 times, his blood pooling on the cathedral floor, while Lorenzo escaped with a neck wound. The aftermath was not justice. It was butchery. Lorenzo's supporters hunted down the conspirators. Some were hanged from the Palazzo della Signoria. Others were thrown from windows. The Archbishop of Pisa was hanged beside them, his body left to rot as a message: touch a Medici, and God himself won't save you. The Pazzi Conspiracy revealed the Medici for what they truly were: not patrons, not princes, but warlords in silk. They controlled Florence through a combination of debt, patronage, terror, and spectacle. Their bank had become a state, and their state had become a protection racket. When Lorenzo needed money, he simply debased the currency. When he needed allies, he married his children into European royalty. When he needed enemies eliminated, he used proxies, assassins, poisoners, and mercenaries whose connections to family could never be proven. But empires built on debt eventually collapse. Lorenzo's son Piero was weak, vain, and politically incompetent. In 1494, French armies invaded Italy, and Piero surrendered Florentine fortresses without a fight. The family was exiled again, their palace looted, their bank teetering on ruin. For a moment, it seemed the Medici were finished. They weren't. They never were. The Medici returned to power in 1512, backed by Spanish arms and papal ambition. But something had changed. The bank was dying, drained by bad loans, embezzlement, and the sheer cost of maintaining an illusion of infinite wealth. The family pivoted. If they could no longer rule through money, they would rule through God. In 1513, Giovanni de' Medici became Pope Leo X. In 1523, another Medici, Giulio, became Pope Clement VII. The family that had laundered papal finances now wore the papal crown. They sold indulgences, igniting the Protestant Reformation. They sacked Rome in 1527 through incompetence and political miscalculation, destroying the city they claimed to protect. They survived assassination, siege, and plague through sheer relentless cunning. Catherine de' Medici, daughter of a dead Medici duke, was married to the future King Henry II of France at age 14. She became queen, then queen mother, then the most feared woman in Europe. When her husband died in a jousting accident, his eye pierced by a splintered lance, Catherine didn't grieve. She schemed. For 3 decades, she manipulated her sons, Francis II, Charles IX, and Henry III, who sat on the French throne like puppets. She orchestrated the St. Bartholomew's Day Massacre in 1572, ordering the murder of thousands of French Protestants, while her son, the king, wept and she watched from a window. She used poison, rumor, and sexual blackmail with the casual efficiency of a Renaissance Machiavelli. When she died in 1589, France was exhausted, bloodied, and still under her shadow. The Medici line in Florence finally ended in 1737, when the last Grand Duke John Gaston died without an heir. The family that had funded the Renaissance, bought the papacy, and terrorized Europe for 3 centuries simply stopped. Their bank had collapsed long before. Their palaces had been sold or seized. Their name became a cautionary tale, then a tourist attraction, then a brand. But their legacy is everywhere. The Medici didn't just fund art. They invented the modern concept of cultural patronage as political control. They didn't just practice banking. They created the financial infrastructure that made capitalism possible. They didn't just commit crimes. They elevated crime to statecraft, showing future generations that power flows not from legitimacy, but from the ability to make legitimacy irrelevant. Walk through Florence today and you will see their mark on every corner. The Dome of Brunelleschi, commissioned by Cosimo. The statues of Michelangelo, funded by Lorenzo. The galleries of the Uffizi, built by their descendants. Beauty and brutality, intertwined so completely that separating them would destroy both. The Medici were not good people. They were not wise rulers. They were criminals of extraordinary vision, bankers of bottomless cruelty, and patrons of transcendent genius. They prove that history doesn't remember the righteous. It remembers the rich, the ruthless, and those who knew how to buy immortality. They were the most powerful criminal family in history, and they never fired a single shot in their own name.